Outlaws mock a quiet bartender, only to discover he's the fastest draw in the West. The town of Dry Creek was the kind of place the sun seemed to punish out of habit, a long strip of dust and timber where hope came to rest only to die slowly, and at the center of it all stood the rusted Spur Saloon, breathing out whiskey fumes and broken laughter from sunrise to well past midnight, and behind its scarred oak bar worked a man no one bothered to truly look at, a quiet bartender with iron-gray eyes and a way of moving that suggested restraint rather than weakness, his name spoken rarely and remembered even less, because in the West, silence was often mistaken for fear. Every morning he wiped the same bar, polished the same glasses, nodded politely to drifters and ranch hands, and kept his mouth shut when men with louder voices and uglier reputations spilled trouble across his floor, and that was why the outlaws laughed at him when they rode in that afternoon, 5 of them, boots heavy, spurs loud, guns worn smooth from use. Their leader Red Mallory flashing a grin like a knife and saying loud enough for the whole saloon to hear that Dry Creek's bartender looked like a man who'd never fired anything more dangerous than a stove. Laughter erupted, chairs scraped back, and the bartender kept pouring, his hands steady, his eyes calm, because long ago he had learned that reacting too soon was how men died, and the outlaws mistook that calm for surrender, pushing harder, mocking the way he spoke softly, the way he never raised his voice, the way he never wore a gun on his hip like a proper man in the West should. Red flicked a silver dollar at him and told him to dance for it, and when the bartender didn't move fast enough, one outlaw smashed a glass, another fired a round into the ceiling, and the room fell silent except for the ringing echo of violence, every patron frozen, every eye darting between the bartender and the men who had already killed in 3 towns before this one. The bartender bent slowly, picked up the coin, set it back on the bar, and said quietly that he'd serve them drinks but not insults, and that was when Red leaned in close and whispered that men like him didn't live long in places like Dry Creek, because the West belonged to those fast enough to take it. Something flickered behind the bartender's eyes then, not anger, not fear, but memory, deep and heavy, like a door closing somewhere inside him, because once upon a time he had been faster than any man breathing, a name whispered around campfires and carved into gravestones, a gunfighter whose draw had ended blood feuds and started legends. Until one night when speed cost him everything he loved and he buried his guns along with his past, swearing that silence was better than glory. The outlaws never saw that history, they only saw a quiet man behind a bar, and when Red ordered him to pour again, threatening to burn the saloon down for sport, the bartender did exactly that, filling glasses while townsfolk held their breath, because sometimes fate waits for the cruel to push just a little too far, and as the outlaws drank, laughed, and planned how they'd humiliate the town before nightfall, none of them noticed the way the bartender's right hand rested just a second longer. Beneath the bar, where an old, well-oiled revolver slept in the dark, waiting for a moment that had been a long time coming, the moment came not with a shout or a warning but with cruelty, when Red Mallory dragged a young farmhand from his chair and shoved a gun under his chin, laughing as he said Dry Creek needed a lesson, and in that breath between threat and trigger pull, the quiet bartender finally spoke, his voice calm, almost gentle, telling Red to let the boy go, and the saloon erupted in laughter. Again, because no one challenges outlaws with words alone, especially not a man who looks like he spent his life hiding, but Red turned, irritated, raising his gun toward the bar, and that was when time broke apart, because the bartender's hand moved faster than thought, faster than fear, faster than any eye could track, the revolver clearing leather, cocking, and firing in one fluid motion that belonged to another era, another man, and before the first outlaw could blink, Red's gun flew from his hand, shot clean through the grip, spinning uselessly to the floor. Silence slammed into the room as the bartender stood straight, gun low, eyes cold now, not cruel, just finished with running, and the outlaws reached for their weapons only to discover they were already too late, because speed like that doesn't warn, it ends things, shots cracking like thunder as bullets struck hands, holsters, belts, never killing, always disabling, until 5 guns lay scattered and 5 outlaws knelt or lay groaning on the floor, staring up at a man they suddenly recognized. Because legends don't die, they just disappear until the world needs them again. The bartender stepped out from behind the bar, every movement precise, telling the men that he could have killed them all before the first body hit the ground, but he was done with death, and Dry Creek would not be remembered as another place where fear ruled. When the sheriff finally arrived, pale and shaking, the bartender handed over the revolver and spoke his old name for the first time in years, a name that made the lawman swallow hard, because he'd heard it in stories told by men who never lied about gunfights. By morning, the outlaws were gone in chains, the town was different, and the bartender returned to wiping his bar like nothing had happened, but now people watched him with respect, understanding that strength doesn't announce itself, and that the quietest man in the room may be the one who's already survived everything. And as the sun rose over Dry Creek, the legend passed quietly into memory again, waiting for another moment, another injustice, another reminder that the West was built not just by fast guns, but by men who knew when to use them and when to lay them down. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that true power is often silent, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because more unforgettable legends are waiting just beyond the horizon.